Jason Miller here from Videomaker.com with your review of the new Sony a7R Mark II. Over the past 2 years, it would appear Sony's internal motto has been to turn heads, having released one fantastic camera after another. We have seen Sony release the a7R, a really fantastic mirrorless 36 megapixel full frame camera, the a7S, which dramatically changed how we thought about low light photography, and the FS7, a cinema camera very much in the vein of the F55, but for a fraction of the price. Now Sony has released the successor to the a7R, the a7R Mark II, and with a couple exceptions, it doesn't disappoint. The Sony a7R Mark II is a full-frame mirrorless 42 megapixel camera that shoots 4K internally. While this is a really great stills camera, Sony is obviously trying to capture the market when it comes to small-form cinema cameras. This is a camera that will give every other budget cinema camera a real run for its money with a 4K image that is pretty darn close to the FS7. The Sony a7R is a full-frame camera with a 24 by 34mm CMOS sensor with 42 megapixels. The camera records 4K in 30 or 24 frames per second in the compressed XAVCS format in 420 color space, but you can get 10-bit 422 when using an external recorder such as the Atomos Shogun, though it would be really nice to be able to record 422 in camera. The a7R Mark II does have the wonderful ability, like the a7S, to switch between full frame and Super 35 mode, giving your lens an extra 60% zoom. This is crazy handy and we use it all the time with both cameras. If HD is your acquisition of choice, then you have a couple format options: XAVCS HD, AVC HD, and MP4. In HD, you can record up to 120 frames per second in 720. The Sony a7R Mark II is actually a very small camera when compared to anything other than the Blackmagic pocket camera. It's about the same size as the a7S and the a7R. The camera is smaller than most cinema lenses you will be putting on it and weighs in at about a pound. The body of the a7R Mark II is constructed from a magnesium alloy and finished to a matte black. The camera fits into the hand nicely and feels very durable, but as usual, that was a test we chose not to perform. The layout of the camera is nearly identical to the a7R and the a7S. It has a wonderful display that pulls back and tilts, though it won't turn or swivel. The viewfinder is very similar to the a7S, and that's a great thing. The viewfinder is amazing, and it's a real pleasure to use. One of the first tests we put this camera through was to take it on a night hike up the side of a mountain, outfitted with the Sony FE-PZ20H135 f4. The a7R Mark II was a real pleasure to use handheld with a viewfinder. It has a very natural feel, and with the new Steady Shot image stabilization system, this is a small camera that can be used effectively handheld, but more on that later. The factory default button layout on the a7R Mark II is just as annoying as the a7S, with the video record button on the side of the camera on the grip. The difference is, unlike the a7S, where you're stuck with that placement, the a7R has the ability to completely customize the layout of the buttons. Plus, Sony added 2 more custom function buttons. This is really terrific. One of the biggest sacrifices we make when using small cameras like DSLRs and mirrorless cameras is that there are very few buttons. The total number of buttons on this camera is nowhere near the FS7, but it's a step in the right direction. Also, the thing is a pound and is ridiculously small, so deal with it. One thing we really liked was assigning a custom button to focus peaking, so we could easily turn it on and off. What we would really like, though, would be able to program one of the custom buttons to switch between full frame and Super 35. Come on, Sony, there is an astounding 62 other choices, but not that one. The biggest question most people have with the Sony a7R Mark II is whether it's as good in low light as the a7S. The ISO range is more limited than the a7S, topping out at 25,600 with an extended range of up to 102,400. The tests were done in 4K in both full frame and Super 35 modes with Picture Profile 5, due mostly because S-Log tends to have a lot more noise than all the other picture profiles. In full frame, the a7R Mark II reaches its usability limit at around 6,400 ISO. After that, the noise becomes too much to use professionally. But surprisingly, in Super 35 mode, the camera was able to go all the way up to ISO 12,000. We found this shocking because the a7S is so much more noisy in Super 35 than full frame. It should be noted, though, that the bar is set pretty high by the a7S, and the a7R Mark II does a decent job in low light, leaps and bounds better than Blackmagic and many other cameras. Remember, if you're lighting your scenes, this is a non-issue. Sony claims that in S-Log, the dynamic range of the a7R Mark II is similar to that of the a7S, which is an impressive 14 stops. While we did not perform any scientific tests, we did a lot of comparison between the two cameras, and they both performed about the same. The a7R Mark II seemed to retain the highlights marginally better, but nothing too extreme. The a7R Mark II, just like the a7S, is at its best when overexposed. These cameras retain highlights better than most video cameras, so you can get away with it. When metered right or slightly underexposed, the images quickly become noisy and lack range. If you overexpose about a stop, magically all that noise disappears and the image is amazing. Rolling shutter. Unfortunately, rolling shutter is still an issue. Sony has yet to find a way around it. It's not as bad as it used to be, but we still need to deal with it. So just don't move your camera around too quickly, particularly side to side, and don't shoot propellers. One thing Sony has improved is moire. We found it difficult to produce. Even when shooting fine mesh, the detail is there with very little loss. The a7R Mark II has fantastic detail and is a super sharp camera. The first thing we did was turn the sharpness down in the camera. In the menu, Sony calls the sharpness detail. The a7R Mark II takes the same NP FW50 battery that the a7S and the a7R take. When shooting 4K, the battery drops really quick. We got about 30 minutes of battery if the camera's left recording in 4K. But we got a lot longer if we're turning the camera off in between small takes. The a7R actually turns on very quick. When hiking and we saw something we wanted to shoot, we would flick the power switch as we raised the camera to our face. By the time we could see through the viewfinder, the camera was ready to go. The poor battery life became apparent when we were testing the overheating problem with the camera. We set up the a7R Mark II in bright sun on a 107-degree Northern California day and rolled 4K at 100 megabits per second in an attempt to see how long the camera would go before shutting down. But to our surprise, the battery went down first at about 30 minutes in. Fortunately, changing the battery is super easy and quick. We were up and running again in less than 20 seconds. The camera went for about another 6 minutes before it overheated and turned off. We had to let it cool for a few minutes before it would stay on any longer than 30 seconds. This is a really big problem for event videographers and documentarians who need constant recording, though in every single practical application, we never experienced this problem. We shot all day in the bright sun and it never overheated. Granted, all the shots lasted less than a minute and we turned the camera off in between takes to save battery. This is an issue one needs to consider before buying the Sony a7S II. A fantastic new addition to the a7R Mark II is SteadyShot. Sony built a 5-axis image stabilization system into the sensor. This can be turned on and off and the sensitivity adjusted. We mostly kept it on auto and it worked great. As previously stated, we took it up the side of a mountain and while standing there panting out of breath, we were able to keep the shot smooth. Shots that would be normally shaky and riddled with vibrations. This system works surprisingly well. It's also a smart system. If the lens you're using has better image stabilization than the camera, then the a7R Mark II will detect that and choose to use the lens's stabilization instead. Sony also claims to have improved the autofocus accuracy and speed. They're right. When compared to the a7S, the a7R Mark II performs much quicker and more accurate. The autofocus behaves much more like traditional video autofocus and not like photography autofocus. When SteadyShot's turned on, there seems to be little difference in the speed and accuracy of the autofocus. Focus tracking, though, works really well too. That is, unless you're in low light, when it can't find edges and won't work at all. The Sony a7R Mark II is a fantastic little camera that has made improvements on the a7S and the a7R, particularly its ability to record 4K internally. Focus control and button functionality are also huge improvements. S-Log performance is fantastic, the dynamic range and the image quality are astounding. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the same low light performance as the a7S, but the a7S only has 13 megapixels on the same size sensor, while the a7R Mark II has 42, so of course the a7S will do better in low light. Lots of people were wondering if this is a replacement for the a7S, and the answer is no. They are both great cameras, but have different strengths. This is a very powerful tool for filmmakers on a budget, or even a great B camera to be used with the FS7 or the F55. But what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. I'm Jason Miller from Videomaker.com. Thank you for watching.